Hello, I'm Eric Sheptock, also known as the Homeless Advocate. I come to you today to ask you to sign a petition which concerns the CCNV Shelter, that is the Community for Creative Nonviolence, and its 1,350 current residents who are about to embark on a journey where they have absolutely no input concerning their future. But before I even get into the details of this matter, let me first speak directly to you, Mayor Vince Gray and Councilman Jim Graham, so as to ask you why it is that you created a task force which will address the future of CCNV and all of its residents. That task force has 16 members, and of the 16, only 8 of them have voting power, and the other 8 do not. So before this is all over, I would like to ask you what your rationale is and to further address that matter. But let me go quickly to the CCNV issue and tell you how CCNV was created and what got us to the point where we're at right now. So, there was a vacant federal building which was built in 1940, which served as a Navy barracks during World War II. It then served as the Security and Exchange Commission. It also served as the Federal City College. Then it sat vacant for a number of years. In the early 80s, homeless people began to squat in this vacant building. Feds came to get him out. A guy named Mitch Snyder organized the homeless. They did direct action against the Reagan administration. And over the course of a 4-year fight, they got Reagan to turn this building into a shelter, to hand this building off to the city, and to sign a covenant that said that this building had to serve the homeless for at least 30 years, beginning on July 7th, 1986 and going through July 7th, 2016. Well, 2016 is almost upon us, and so I did some research and I found out about the property rights, about the history of the building, and I sent that information over to Councilman Jim Graham, who convened a hearing on the issue, which took place on June 27, 2013. And then at that hearing, he decided to convene a task force, and that task force had its first meeting on October 8th. So, I have in front of me a list of the 16 names of the members of the CCNV task force. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one. First, the 8 people who have voting power. So we have a designee for Mayor Vince Gray. There's Matt Scalf. I don't know an awful lot about him, but what I do know is that Mayor Vince Gray has a history in human services. Nonetheless, he, like his predecessor, even though he has a history in human services, has forsaken the poor and the homeless since becoming mayor. And then we have Councilman Jim Graham. Now, his heart seems to be in the right place. I don't know of any major accomplishments on his part since he gained oversight of the Department of Human Services. But be that as it may, he's a good guy, and he is the one who convened the task force. And so this might be his first major accomplishment on the part of the homeless. And then we have Brian Hanlon, who is the director of the Department of General Services, the Department of DC government that takes care of all government buildings. His proxy is Patrick Perry, whom I don't know anything about, but nonetheless, DGS works for the mayor, and I would have to suspect that Mr. Hanlon and his department are going to vote in favor of what the mayor wants. We then have David Burns, the director of Department of Human Services. His proxy is Darrell Kaysen. Now, I know Darrell Kaysen as well as David Burns, and I know that Darrell Kaysen spends most of his time in the office. He is not a hands-on guy. He's not out there at the shelters talking to homeless people. He's not really in touch with what homeless people want and need. He's a policy analyst, you know, and so I'd have to question why it is that Mr. Burns sent his policy analyst rather than coming down himself, or having somebody who has more knowledge of homeless issues at these meetings. And then we have the Department of Behavioral Health, formerly known as the Department of Mental Health, headed by Steve Barron. His proxy is Jonathan Ward. I've known Jonathan Ward for a number of years now. Jonathan Ward is out there dealing with homeless people, or at least he has been in the past. So he knows the issues, he knows the people, He knows what they're up against, and he knows how to speak on their behalf effectively. So I actually commend Steve Barron for choosing Jonathan Ward as his designee. And then we have Daniel Hickson, who is the commander for the 1st District of the of MPD. And his proxy is Brian Murphy. Now, I don't know much about Brian Murphy or about Daniel Hickson, but what I do know is that the homeless kind of feel a bit insulted, like Big Brother is watching when you send the police to a meeting about homeless issues. And I would have to also suspect that the police are going to bring arrest reports and other things that kind of take the homeless community and color it bad. Let's hope that they don't go there, but that's always something that we know could happen. And then we have Rico Harris, the director of CCNV. So, he actually is homeless himself, and he's a director of a homeless shelter, which is staffed by volunteers, 100%. And I commend him for being there. I'm glad that he was chosen. And then we have the ICH, the DC Interagency Council on Homelessness, headed by Alan Liu, and the proxy who was sent is Cheryl Barnes, who herself is formerly homeless. So we're glad to have her there. So out of these first 8 people, we have 6 who are not homeless and have never been homeless. We have 2 who are either presently homeless or formerly homeless. And the majority of those 8 are not going to vote in favor of the homeless community and of homeless interest. And then we have the 8 ex officio members, people who don't have voting power. Of those 8, I'm the first one mentioned, yours truly, Eric Sheptock. Now, I presently am homeless, and I reside at the CCNV Shelter. And in addition to that, I have other credentials. I mean, I told you earlier on that I'm the man who got this whole process started. I did the research. I sent it to Councilman Jim Graham. Now, in addition to that, myself and Shark, the group that I'm chairman of, we have done a lot of outreach to the homeless community to make them aware of the task force. And it was I personally who acquired a copy of the movie Promises to Keep, and I had it shown right after the first task force meeting. In addition to myself, we have Reverend Alberta Johnson. She is the director of the 2 women's shelters that are located in the same building as CCNV. So she is in direct contact with homeless people, quite obviously. We have Richard Bradley, who is the director of Downtown Bid, that is the Business Improvement District. And he clearly works for the business community. The Downtown Bid functions pretty much like a small chamber of commerce, and they bring forth the interest of the business community. They do have a department that deals with homeless people and that does outreach to the homeless community, but because the agency as a whole is working for the business community, we can rest assured that the interest of the homeless gets suppressed by Downtown Bid within their agency. And then we have Patty Vigier. She's the director of the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless. They've been working for the homeless for around 30 years. I know Patty Vigier very well, and I know that she will speak on behalf of the homeless, and they are a very strong voice in the homeless advocacy community. And then we have Ed Lazier, who is the director of the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. That is a progressive think tank that works with DC government to ensure that the homeless and the poor are not forgotten as the DC Council works on the budget. And then we have Jean Badalamenti, who actually works with Miriam's Kitchen, which has been serving DC's homeless for about 30 years. And I'm not sure how many of the CCNV residents actually eat at Miriam's Kitchen. My guess is that they were brought into the fray due to the fact that they have done direct service to the homeless community for so many years, and that they can give useful input as to what homeless people want and need. And then we have Sue Marshall, who is the director of TCP. TCP is shorthand for the Community Partnership for the Prevention of Homelessness. TCP receives money from DC government, and then they're the ones who fork that money out to the different shelters and other service providers who provide direct service to the homeless community. Now, Sue Marshall is a good woman. I've known her for several years now, but I'd have to question in whose interest is she going to vote if she had voting power. Would she vote in the interest of the homeless themselves or in the interest of DC government, which gives her all this contract money? And then we have Julia Lightfoot. She is the executive director of Clean and Sober Streets, which is also located in the same building as CCNV. And it is clearly a drug program. And Julia Lightfoot was also involved in the fight to create CCNV back in the 80s. Now, having said all of that, it's clear to me that Mitch Snyder wanted CCNV to be a building which would serve the homeless and would serve as a model for homeless service providers across the country. And I'm sure that Julia Lightfoot is well aware of that, and that she brings a lot to the table. So, in addition to all 16 members that I just mentioned, I'd like to also throw in the name of Mayor for Life, Marion Barry, who is presently serving as a councilman representing DC's Ward 8. So, let me be clear to the homeless community. You know, it is my preference to have additional homeless people from CCNV on the task force with voting power, but then again, there's reality. You know, at this point in time, certain things are etched in stone, and it doesn't look like we're going to have additional homeless people from CCNV with voting power on the task force as much as we may want it. And so that is the injustice in this whole thing. It is so unjust for them to make decisions about homeless people without homeless people. And it's also ironic on yet another level, because on the one hand, we want homeless people to become self-sufficient, and yet on the other hand, we're not giving them a stake in their future. You know, so let's exercise their ability to think for themselves. But then again, you know, the homeless will have a vote. Come to think of it, you know, there is this tiered voting system. So the task force is going to have committees, and the homeless can vote in the committees. But that kind of raises a question of, you know, how much say-so they're really going to have, because look at it this way. For those of you who don't know how things function in a committee system, well, so let's say, for example, that the mayor's designee has a committee, and that committee reaches out to the homeless, and 50 homeless people come and become part of that committee, and they vote. And of the 50, 35 of them vote one way, you know, and now the mayor's designee, being the head of that committee, can go back to the task force where the official voting takes place, and he can decide to vote the way that those 35 homeless people told him to vote, or he can just say, screw you, I'm going to vote the way I want to vote, in spite of what the majority of the homeless people on my committee said. And so, you know, I have to suspect that that's exactly how it's going to go. And so what can be done then to change that dynamic so that the homeless vote is not just pro forma? Because the way it looks right now, the homeless vote is just pro forma, just to make it look like the homeless had a stake in their future and had some input in this process that directly affects them. So, in conclusion, I have these three things. Number one, homeless community, especially those of you who reside at CCNV. I do want you to attend these meetings where decisions are being made about your future. Okay, I want you to hear what's being said about you, and I want you to be able to give your input. Let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. So do stay involved in the process. Get involved and stay involved. I strongly encourage you to do that. Number two, I want everybody out there who's watching this video to click on this link and sign this petition. And number three, this is directed at you, Mayor Vince Gray and Councilman Jim Graham. I would love to have you explain the logic for giving only 8 task force members voting power and not giving it to the other 8? What was your logic in having 8 ex officio members? And what was the logic you used in determining who had voting power and who didn't? Please make that clear to me. Thank you.